There is a specific kind of silence that a room full of strangers produces when something real happens in front of them. Not the silence of boredom, not the silence of confusion, the silence of 200 people simultaneously holding their breath because they are watching a human being absorb something difficult with a grace they were not certain they themselves could manage. That is the silence that fell over the Family Feud studio on a Wednesday afternoon in January 2024. The scoreboard read 199 points. The woman standing at the podium had needed 200. She had answered 5 questions in 20 seconds with the focus and precision of someone who had spent 9 weeks preparing for exactly this moment. She had done everything right. She had given everything she had. And she was 1 point short of the $20,000 that would have paid for her daughter's hearing aids, covered 3 months of past due rent, and given this family something it had not had in 4 years of single parenthood, breathing room. Her name was Cynthia Reeves. She was 38 years old. She was standing very still, looking at the number on the board, not because she was composed, but because she had not yet decided what to do with what she was feeling. Steve Harvey looked at her. He looked at the scoreboard. He looked back at her. And then he did something that made 200 strangers go completely, absolutely silent. He did not move. He did not speak. He did not gesture to the production team. He did not begin the standard closing remarks that 16 seasons of hosting had made instinctive. He simply stopped, in the middle of a live television taping, in front of a studio audience and multiple cameras, and stood there with the stillness of a man who has decided that this particular moment is not going to be rushed past. What followed would take 11 minutes. It would not be forgotten by anyone in that room. Cynthia Reeves had grown up in Akron, Ohio, the middle child of 3 in a family where money was always the 4th presence at the dinner table, not mentioned directly, but felt by everyone. Her parents had both worked steadily, her father at a tire plant, her mother as a home health aide. They had not been poor in the way that required charity, but they had been poor in the way that meant nothing was ever easy, and that the margin between managing and not managing was always thinner than anyone wanted to admit. She had inherited from her mother a talent for stretching resources, and from her father a refusal to complain about the stretching. She had married at 26 to a man named Derek who was, in the early years, everything she had hoped for. Steady, funny, present in the way that matters most, the kind of man who showed up reliably and without being asked. Their daughter Aaliyah was born in 2018 and was, by any available measure, the organizing fact of both their lives from the moment she arrived. Aaliyah was diagnosed with bilateral sensorineural hearing loss at 8 months old. The diagnosis came with a recommended treatment path that the pediatric audiologist laid out clearly. Properly fitted hearing aids, fitted early, followed by speech therapy, followed by regular audiology appointments. Early intervention, the audiologist explained, was not merely preferable but critical. The window of language development in early childhood was specific and time-sensitive, and a child who received appropriate amplification early would have dramatically better language outcomes than one who did not. The hearing aids that Aaliyah needed were not covered by the family's insurance, which classified them as elective medical devices. The cost for a properly fitted pair of pediatric hearing aids was $3,400. The cost for the accompanying speech therapy was additional. Cynthia and Derek had managed it. They had made cuts in other places, taken on extra hours, accepted help from Cynthia's mother without wanting to. Aaliyah had been fitted with her first hearing aids at 14 months, had received her speech therapy, and had developed language on schedule with her hearing peers. She was, by the time she turned 4, a child who talked constantly and with enthusiasm, who had opinions about everything, and who had recently informed her mother with complete seriousness that her favorite color was the color of the sky when it is almost dark but not yet. Derek left in the spring of 2020. It was not a violent departure. There was no single catastrophic event, no betrayal dramatic enough to serve as a clear explanation. He had simply, over the course of about 18 months, become less present, less engaged, less reliable, less like himself, until one day he was not there at all. He had moved to Cleveland, maintained intermittent contact, and provided child support with a consistency that was better than some and worse than enough. Cynthia had reorganized her life around the new shape of it, with the methodical focus of a woman who understood that the alternative to adaptation was not an option when a child depended on you. She had taken a second job, working weekend shifts as a pharmacy technician in addition to her weekday position as an administrative coordinator at a pediatric clinic. And she had managed, with the precision of someone who has learned to live at the exact edge of her means, to keep the apartment, keep Aaliyah in hearing aids and speech therapy, and keep herself functional enough to be present for her daughter at the end of long days. But Aaliyah was now 5 years old, and 5-year-olds grow. The hearing aids she had been wearing since she was 14 months old were no longer adequately fitted. The audiologist had confirmed at their most recent appointment that new devices were necessary, and that the delay in replacing them was beginning to affect the quality of sound amplification Aaliyah was receiving. The cost of the new devices, $3,800. The amount Cynthia had managed to save toward them over 14 months of deliberate, disciplined effort, $900. The gap was $2,900, which in the economy of Cynthia's household was not a gap that could be closed by working harder, because she was already working as hard as it was physically possible to work while also being a mother. Her cousin Brenda had applied to Family Feud on Cynthia's behalf in September, and had told Cynthia about it only after they received confirmation of the selection. Cynthia's response had been a long, careful silence followed by, "When do we start preparing?" Because Cynthia Reeves was the kind of woman who, when a door opened, did not stand in the doorway wondering if she deserved to walk through it. She walked through it and figured out the rest as she went. 9 weeks of preparation followed. Cynthia, Brenda, Cynthia's brother Terrence, Terrence's wife Gail, and Cynthia's mother Dolores studied survey patterns the way students study for professional examinations. Systematically, consistently, and with specific attention to the categories most likely to appear in fast money. They practiced at Cynthia's kitchen table while Aaliyah slept. They quizzed each other in the car. Cynthia's mother, who was 63 and had watched Family Feud since it first aired, and had never once in all those decades thought she would need the knowledge professionally, turned out to be the most accurate predictor of survey answers in the group, a fact that Cynthia filed under evidence that her mother was always, in the most useful ways, full of surprises. Aaliyah had helped Cynthia pack for Lowe's Angels. She had placed with great seriousness one of her small stuffed animals, a rabbit named Button, into her mother's carry-on bag, and told Cynthia that Button would help her win. Cynthia had thanked her and had carried Button to California. Button was in Cynthia's jacket pocket when she walked onto the stage of Family Feud. The family they played against in the main game was the Osai family from Philadelphia. A grandmother, 2 adult grandchildren, a nephew, and a cousin-in-law who had been absorbed into the family unit with the seamless thoroughness that some families achieve and others spend years aspiring to. They were prepared and warm and clearly enjoying themselves, which Cynthia noted without alarm because she had learned during 9 weeks of preparation that enjoying yourself and playing well were not incompatible, and that the families who tried too hard to be serious often made mistakes that the relaxed ones did not. The main game was close throughout. Cynthia played steadily and without flash, the way she did most things, not performing confidence but operating from it, answering when she was certain and deferring when she was not, which in a game built on survey answers was exactly the right calibration. The Reeves family won by 14 points, which was a margin that felt comfortable in the room and that Cynthia experienced as adequate rather than reassuring, because adequate was the category of outcome she had learned to work with. The fast money format required 2 players. Cynthia would go first. Brenda would follow. Brenda was a practical choice as well as an obvious one. She was 41, worked as an insurance adjuster, and had a gift for thinking quickly under pressure that her profession had sharpened over 15 years of claims assessment. She was also, more relevantly, Cynthia's closest person, the one who had submitted the application, who had driven them to the airport, who had been sitting in the family cluster on the other side of the stage, with the controlled tension of someone who is trying very hard to believe in a good outcome and is not entirely succeeding. Steve Harvey approached the podium with the warmth he brings to all contestants. He had been briefed about the Reeves family before the taping in the standard way, a producer's summary of who they were and why they had applied. He had read it and noted it and set it aside, as he always did, to be returned to at the appropriate moment. The appropriate moment, he had learned over 16 seasons, was rarely when a producer scheduled it. It was when the person in front of him showed him it was time. "Cynthia," he said, "you look ready." "I am ready," she said. There was no performance in it. It was simply true. The 20-second clock began. "Name something people buy to feel better after a bad day." Cynthia said, "Chocolate." Number 1 answer, 41 points. "Name a reason someone might be late to their own wedding." Cynthia said, "Cold feet." Number 2 answer, 29 points. "Name something you do before a job interview." Cynthia said, "Practice what you're going to say." Number 3 answer, 17 points. Name a word that goes with the word birthday. Cynthia said cake. Number 1 answer, 52 points. Name something people do when they're nervous. Cynthia said bite their nails. Number 2 answer, 24 points. The buzzer sounded. Cynthia's total, 163 points. The audience applauded. 163 was a strong score. Brenda needed 37 points. 37 points from 5 answers, none of which could repeat anything Cynthia had given, was very manageable. The math in the room felt optimistic. Steve Harvey turned to address the audience with the brief energy he uses to hold a room between players. 163 points, ladies and gentlemen, that is how you go first. He turned back toward the family cluster. Brenda, you are up. You need 37 points. Do not overthink it. Trust your instincts. Brenda stepped to the podium. She was wearing a deep green blazer and earrings she had borrowed from her mother for the occasion, and she had the expression of a woman who has spent 9 weeks preparing for this exact 30 seconds and is now discovering that no amount of preparation fully accounts for the specific quality of having 200 people watch you in complete silence. She adjusted her stance. She nodded to the timer operator. Her 20 seconds began. Name something people buy to feel better after a bad day. She could not say chocolate. She said wine. Number 3 answer, 19 points. Name a reason someone might be late to their own wedding. She could not say cold feet. She said traffic. Number 4 answer, 11 points. Name something you do before a job interview. She could not say practice. She said iron your clothes. Number 5 answer, 4 points. A small sound moved through the audience, not unkind, but honest. Name a word that goes with the word birthday. She could not say cake. She said party. Number 2 answer, 31 points. The audience responded with warmth. They were on her side. Name something people do when they're nervous. She could not say bite their nails. She said sweat. She said it quickly, and for a moment the room held on. The board revealed number 5 answer, 2 points. Brenda's total, 67 points. Cynthia's total, 163 points. Combined, 230 points. The room began to celebrate, and then it did not. Because in the 3 seconds between the final score appearing and the celebration fully forming, something happened that the studio audience processed before they fully understood it. Cynthia's face did not change. She was not celebrating. She was looking at the scoreboard with the focused attention of a woman who had done the arithmetic before anyone else in the room. The arithmetic had produced a different number. The show's scoring system had flagged Brenda's third answer, iron your clothes, as duplicating in substance an answer that had been given by the opposing family during the main game, which, under the specific rules applied in certain fast money configurations, made it ineligible. The points were removed. The corrected total was 199 points, 1 point short. The announcement of the correction landed in the studio with the specific, sickening quality of a sound that is not loud, but that changes everything. The celebration that had been forming dissolved. Brenda put both hands over her mouth. Cynthia stood very still, 199 points. The $20,000 was gone. Steve Harvey looked at the corrected scoreboard. He looked at Cynthia. He looked at Brenda, who was shaking beside the podium. He looked at Dollars, Cynthia's mother, who was sitting in the family cluster with her hand pressed flat over her heart. He did not move. The studio went completely, entirely silent. 11 seconds. That was how long Steve Harvey stood in the center of that studio without speaking, without moving, without doing anything except looking at Cynthia Reeves with the full, undivided attention of a man who has decided that this moment requires presence before it requires words. The 11 seconds were not empty. They were, for everyone watching, some of the most loaded seconds in recent television memory, the specific silence of a room that has agreed without discussion to hold still and let something real be what it is. When Steve finally spoke, he did not address the scoreboard. He did not explain the ruling. He did not move toward the standard closing sequence that the end of a fast money round, win or lose, was supposed to initiate. He walked to Cynthia. Not toward the center of the stage, not to a camera-friendly position. He walked directly to where she was standing, which was slightly to the left of the podium, very still in the particular stillness of someone who is using every available resource to hold themselves together in public. "Tell me why you're really here," he said. It was not the kind of question that expects performance. Cynthia understood this. She had been watching Steve Harvey host this show for years, and she knew the difference between the television question and the real one, and this was the real one. She told him. She told him about Aaliyah's diagnosis at 8 months. She told him about the hearing aids, the speech therapy, the developmental window, and the audiologist's most recent assessment. She told him about Derek leaving. She told him about the 2 jobs and the $900 saved over 14 months and the gap that would not close. She told him about Aaliyah packing Button into her carry-on bag and telling her the rabbit would help her win. She reached into her jacket pocket and placed Button on the podium ledge between herself and Steve Harvey. The audience, which had been silent since the score correction, remained silent. This was not the silence of people waiting for something to happen. It was the silence of people who understand that they are witnessing something private being shared publicly and who have the good instinct not to interrupt it. Steve Harvey looked at the stuffed rabbit on the podium ledge for a moment. Then he looked at Cynthia. "How old is Aaliyah?" he asked. "5," Cynthia said. "She will be 6 in April." Steve nodded slowly. He was quiet for another moment, not the hesitation of uncertainty, but the pause of someone who already knows what they are going to do and wants to say it correctly. "I have 3 rules on this show," he said, turning to address the audience as well as Cynthia. "Rule 1, you play the game as it is set up and the score is the score. Rule 2, the people who come on this show deserve to be treated with dignity regardless of whether they win or lose." He paused. "Rule 3 is the one people forget. Rule 3 is that I am not just a host. I am a father. And when a mother stands in front of me and tells me that her 5-year-old daughter cannot hear properly because the hearing aids she needs cost $3,800 and the insurance company says that is elective." He said the word with a quiet precision that conveyed exactly what he thought of it. That is not a game show problem. That is a problem that exists outside this building, and it does not stop existing just because the scoreboard says 199. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The Steve and Marjorie Harvey Foundation does not give money to game shows. It gives money to children, and to the mothers who are doing everything humanly possible to give those children what they need. He produced an envelope. "This is a check for $15,000 from the foundation. Combined with what your family takes home from today, that is enough to get Aaliyah her hearing aids, cover the audiology appointments that go with them, and give you something left over so that the next unexpected thing that happens in your life does not immediately become a crisis." He held it toward her. Cynthia looked at the envelope. She looked at Steve Harvey. She looked at the stuffed rabbit on the podium ledge. Then she did something that no one in the room predicted, including Steve Harvey. She picked up Button, held the rabbit against her chest with both hands, bowed her head, and was quiet for a long, complete moment. It was a private gesture made in public. It was the specific body language of a person returning briefly to something interior, a prayer, a thought, a communication with her daughter across the distance between Los Angeles and Akron, Ohio, before coming back to the room. When she raised her head, her eyes were wet, but her voice was clear. "My daughter told me Button would help me win," she said. "I am going to tell her she was right." The silence that had been holding the room released, not with the explosive energy of a contest one, but with the warm, sustained applause of people who have been moved by something genuine and are expressing it without pressure. Steve Harvey's eyes were bright. He accepted this description of the moment without argument. "Button did the work," he said. "You just showed up for it." He pulled her into an embrace, and Brenda and Dolers and the rest of the Reeves family came together at the center of the stage in the specific shape of a family that has just been through something hard and has come out the other side of it still intact. In the front row, a woman who had come to the taping as a stranger was crying openly and making no effort to stop. She was not alone. The episode aired 5 weeks after the taping. The production team had faced the same editorial decision they always faced when a moment exceeded the standard format: how much to preserve and how much to compress for time. They made the same choice the team had been making in similar circumstances with increasing frequency. They preserved it. The full sequence from the score correction through Steve Harvey's speech and Cynthia's response ran in the final cut without significant reduction. It was 9 minutes and 40 seconds of television that felt nothing like its length. The clip traveled in the way that specific kinds of television moments travel, not because they are surprising or sensational, but because they are true. People shared it with the messages that accompany things that feel important. "Watch this. You need to see this. I cannot explain why I am crying, just watch." Within 48 hours, it had been viewed more than 20 million times across platforms. Within a week, it had been translated and subtitled in 7 languages by volunteers who had no professional obligation to do so, and who simply felt that more people should be able to understand what was happening in it. Cynthia and the family returned to Akron on a Thursday evening, arriving after midnight in the specific exhaustion of people who have been through something large and are only now beginning to feel the full weight of it. Cynthia's mother Dolers had slept on the plane. Brenda had not. Cynthia had stared at the window for most of the flight with Button in her lap, thinking about the precise sequence of events that had produced that day, and feeling the particular gratitude that comes not from receiving something you expected, but from receiving something you had not known how to ask for. Aaliyah was asleep when they arrived. Cynthia stood in the doorway of her daughter's room for several minutes before going to bed. The hearing aid appointment was scheduled within 2 weeks of their return. The audiologist fitted Aaliyah with a pair of devices that were, by every clinical measure, significantly superior to what she had been using. The fitting took 2 hours. Aaliyah spent most of it asking the audiologist technical questions about how the devices worked, which the audiologist answered with the patience of a professional who recognizes a child with genuine curiosity and is not going to waste it. On the drive home, Aaliyah was quiet for several minutes. Then she said, "It sounds different." "Different good or different bad?" Cynthia asked. "Different more," Aaliyah said. "I can hear more things." Cynthia pulled into a gas station parking lot and sat for a moment with the car running. "Good more or bad more?" she asked. "Good more," Aaliyah said, with the certainty of a 5-year-old who has no reason to be imprecise about something this clear. "It is all good more." Cynthia sat in that parking lot for 4 additional minutes. Aaliyah, who was already examining her new devices in the sun visor mirror with the focused interest of someone who has been given an interesting piece of technology and wants to understand it, did not remark on the delay. The public response to the episode brought Cynthia attention she had not sought and was not entirely prepared for. Interview requests came from local news stations and then from national outlets. A parenting publication asked her to write about the experience of navigating pediatric medical costs as a single parent. She agreed to do that because the subject was real and the platform was real, and she thought that if her family's experience could make the conversation more visible for other families in similar situations, then the visibility was serving a purpose. The piece she wrote was precise, personal, and entirely without self-pity. It described the specific economics of managing a child's medical needs on a single income with intermittent support, the particular frustration of insurance classifications that bear no relationship to clinical necessity, and the way that financial precarity shapes not just material decisions, but the interior life of a parent. The persistent low-grade anxiety that accompanies the knowledge that the margin between managing and not managing is always thinner than you want anyone to know. It was shared widely. Several advocacy organizations for pediatric hearing loss cited it in their own communications. A senator's office contacted the publication to request a copy, which Cynthia noted with the careful, undramatic optimism of a person who has learned not to expect too much from institutions, but who understands that attention is a form of resource, and that resources are worth accumulating. Steve Harvey mentioned Cynthia and Aaliyah on his radio program the week the episode aired. He said what he had said before in similar circumstances, and what he meant every time, that the people who come to that show are not contestants to him. They are families, with real lives and real needs, and the 22 minutes they spend on a game show stage are 22 minutes that do not fully contain who they are or what they are carrying. He said that Cynthia Reeves had reminded him of something he tried not to forget, that the right response to witnessing someone do everything right and still come up short is not to explain the rules. It is to stay in the room. "She had a stuffed rabbit in her pocket," he said, and left it at that, because some details do not need elaboration. The Steve and Marjorie Harvey Foundation continued its relationship with the Reeves family beyond the initial check. A follow-up grant was provided 6 months later to cover the speech therapy appointments that accompanied Aaliyah's new devices, and that extended beyond the coverage the family's insurance provided. Cynthia received the notification by email on a Tuesday morning before work. She read it once, set her phone face down on the kitchen table, finished making Aaliyah's breakfast, saw her daughter off to school, and then sat back down at the table and read it again. She sent a thank you note by mail. Handwritten, 2 paragraphs, specific and genuine. She mentioned Aaliyah's progress at her most recent speech therapy assessment. She mentioned that Aaliyah had recently informed her kindergarten teacher that she wanted to be an audiologist when she grew up, which the teacher had reported with the warmth of someone who finds 5-year-old's professional ambitions genuinely moving. The note was received and kept. Brenda, whose answer had cost the family their win by the margin of a scoring technicality, spent several weeks carrying that fact in a way that those who knew her recognized as the specific weight of a person who holds themselves responsible for outcomes they could not have fully controlled. Cynthia addressed it directly and only once. She told Brenda that what had happened was not her fault, that the scoring rule was obscure and unfair to invoke in that context, and that the day had ended better than either of them could have planned, and that Brenda was never to bring it up again in a context of guilt. Brenda accepted this instruction with the relief of someone who has been waiting for permission to put something down. She brought it up one more time at Christmas to say that she was grateful it had happened the way it did because the story that resulted was better than a win would have been. Cynthia told her she was probably right. They did not discuss it further. Aaliyah turned 6 in April as planned. Her birthday party had 14 children in attendance and a cake with a rabbit on it, Cynthia's idea, and Aaliyah's enthusiastic endorsement. Button was present at the table, propped against the centerpiece with the dignity of a guest of honor. When asked at her party what she wished for when she blew out her candles, Aaliyah considered the question with the seriousness that important questions deserve. "I already got my wish," she said. "My ears work right now." The room, 14 children, 8 parents, 2 grandmothers, and Brenda, was quiet for just a moment before the birthday noise resumed. Cynthia, standing at the edge of the room with a piece of cake she had not yet eaten, looked at her daughter. She was, by every measure that mattered, exactly where she needed to be. Steve Harvey's 11 seconds of silence in that studio, the specific stillness of a man who has decided not to move on, was studied by a media professor at Northwestern University the following semester as an example of what she called intentional presence in broadcast performance. She used it in a unit on the difference between professional reflexes and genuine response, and she played the clip for her students without context first, asking them to describe what they saw before explaining what it was. Her students, without exception, said the same thing in different words. They said it looked like someone had decided that the moment was more important than the show. That, the professor told them, was correct, and it was rarer than it should be. Cynthia Reeves still works 2 jobs. She has reduced the weekend pharmacy shifts from 2 per month to 1 because the financial pressure has eased enough to allow it, and because Aaliyah is 6 years old and the Saturday mornings belong to her now. They spend them at the kitchen table, working through library books and early math, and whatever subject Aaliyah has decided is interesting that week, which changes with the fluid enthusiasm of a child who has not yet learned to be selective about what she finds worth knowing. Button sits on the kitchen windowsill. Cynthia has not moved it since she came home from Lowe's Angels. She does not intend to.